Okay, welcome everybody. We have another Tridium talk queued up for you, back-to-back weeks, but with good reason. We are trying our best to get our community more comfortable with certificates and encryption. So hopefully you caught last week's Tridium talk. If not, it's up on the website. You can watch it at your leisure. It helps provide a little background to what we're actually going to be showing off in regards to a 413 feature. We made some certificate management enhancements, and we provided a web view so that you can actually do this work from the browser. And typically for the feature overview, we just kind of show off the new thing. Since we've already had certificate management in Niagara all these years, we thought we'd take the opportunity to help do some educating using the tools, get everyone more comfortable. And that started with last week's Tridium talk, where we talked a little more about encryption and secure communication in general, and less about how it sits in Niagara. And now this one will hopefully tie it all together for you, showing off the new feature, and we'll walk through a demo of creating a certificate, signing it, serving it, and watching it be trusted by the browser. So I'm Chris Riccobono. I'm on the product management team, and with me today is Bill Smith, security architect here at Tridium. Bill's going to be here to help, get me out of any traps I may fall into, and us product people sometimes like to run our mouths. He will jump in and correct me if I go off script and start making stuff up. And happy Thursday. It is May 11th. Speaking of May, if you happen to find yourself in London next week, please come and join us for the Niagara Forum. We've been ramping up for this. I think everyone at both Tridium UK office and here in Richmond, we've been quite busy leading up to this. And I think we're going to put on a really great show, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. There's still opportunity to register. I just checked as of this morning, my time. So by all means, if you can make it to the area, please join us. All right, but let's talk about today's agenda on the Tridium talk. As always, we hit what's new with Niagara, and then we dive into the meat and potatoes, certificate management enhancements in WebView, and then we'll highlight some of the Niagara resource and materials that you can leverage to continue your education or reference at a later time. As always, Niagara covers a huge area. No one person's going to know it all. We don't expect one person to remember it all. We just want people to have the high level understanding and then be capable of getting through documentation and being able to set up anything that their customers may need. And then, of course, we'll wrap it up with Q&A. Like last week, this may run a little long, so we'll play that by ear. Hopefully, we'll be able to tackle any questions relevant to the topic online. But if not, we promise we always gather the questions, get some answers for them, and post that at some point along with the recorded video. And all throughout the presentation, Bill's also going to help with some Q&A moderation as well. So if you do have some questions, he may be able to address them as we go. But if they're relevant to the topic, we'll try to mark that to discuss, online. So first up, what's new with Niagara? Current LTS branch 410U5 is our current update build. We are eyeing, because every 90 days we get a new JRE update. So we are eyeing the U6 drop. So that's actually in the works right now, or picking up any critical defects and any known security bugs and addressing them, and we'll release a U6 when it is ready. And obviously, we're ramping up for 413. We are in beta testing. We actually started the 413 testing a little several weeks ago, but just yesterday, I'm very excited to announce we shipped the first JS9000 out to a beta site, the first batch actually, and we continue to box and ship them today. So that's very exciting. That's a long a long-awaited release, and probably covers about 2 years worth of work. So excited to see that milestone reached, and we'll be getting those installed in production. Make sure we, do some proper testing against the hardware and the software firmware running on it, and excited to release that in tandem with the 4.13 release, which at this point I think we're eyeing early Q3 is hopefully our target. And of course, with all Tridium talks, my favorite slide, the features summary, highlighting all the hard work we've done over the years leading up to 4.13, showing off the new features. Today, covering the, as you know by now, is the certificate manager enhancements. And so let's dive right in. Last week, touched on this. I'm just going to kind of bring this up again. We talked about the two problems that you run into when trying to securely communicate across a network. You have an authentication problem and a secure communication problem. Secure communication being, you've got sensitive information you want to send across the wire, and you don't want others to know about it. And the two potential solutions that we talked through, and I think in depth in last week's, there is digital identification and encrypting and decrypting, and that makes up what is known as the public key infrastructure. So that's what's leveraged when trying to establish encrypted and secure communication across a network. Again, last week's goes more in depth on that, but where we sort of stopped was we kind of touched on the background information, but then we didn't really get into I think the more tangible stuff, particularly when it relates to Niagara. And this is a slide from last week as well. It said, what about the key store and the trust store? There's a system trust store, user trust store, loud host tab, and then more complicated, there's a workbench user home key store and a daemon user home key store. How do we make sense of it? So hopefully this will tie it all together. I think I've covered it, but if not, we will do our best to keep educating the community so that everyone feels comfortable with this stuff, and we don't have to, we just don't have to struggle as much as we do. All right, so I thought an easy way to lead into this is just like you experience in Niagara. When you first make that station connection, you are served up a certificate everyone is likely familiar with, that default certificate, and then explain a little bit about what the allowed host tab is and what that means. And then finally, it's a good opportunity to also talk a little bit about the differences between the workbench user home and the daemon user home, and why these are two separate locations, and why there's different areas to get to these. When you use certain views, you're actually accessing different files and different directories. And I slightly misspoke there. I said this is the certificate you're all used to seeing. In fact, this is a little different now. This will be in 4.13. You can notice the certificate. It's still, the subject name still Niagara 4. However, and we'll see this in the demo, the alias for the certificate is now default. And you can see marked as the organization is for recovery purposes. And so again, we'll highlight this a little more in the demo. There's now that default certificate, and you cannot remove it. When you hit reset, it will exist. And that is so that there's always some certificate, and that'll keep people from accidentally locking themselves out. To date, you have that certificate. I believe its alias is Tridium, not default. And that will still remain when you upgrade. So nothing's going to break when you upgrade your station, and if you're still pointed at that original certificate. But what you will see is a new generated default certificate whose alias is actually called default. And you'll see the little icon's a little different when we look at it in the demo, that it marks a certificate that cannot be removed other than hitting the reset button and generating a new default. But what I really wanted to point out here, and this I think is kind of misunderstood, when you make that connection, and on the left-hand side, this is Workbench to client, which we also talked about last week a little bit, client server. Workbench to client, making a station connection to a station, which is Workbench the client connecting to the Fox service running on the station, and the Fox service is served up a certificate. On the right-hand side, you see a browser also acting as a client. It's connecting to the station, but it's connecting to the web service of the station, and it too is served up the same certificate. And everyone who's used Niagara to date is familiar with these two pictures. On the right-hand side, everyone just clicks that bottom proceed to localhost unsafe. And on the left-hand side, everyone just hits accept and then connects and goes about their merry way. What I really want to emphasize is that hitting accept here and proceeding to localhost unsafe, quote unquote, these are similar behaviors. What you're telling the client is that despite the fact that there is no established chain of trust, I still want to make this connection. So you are consenting to the idea that I'm well aware the certificate in this case is self-signed, and therefore there is no established chain of trust. It was not issued by a trusted authority that is in my trust store, and I'm okay with that. And when you click accept in Workbench, you'll see a new entry created in the allowed host tab. In a browser, and each browser can do this a little differently, they will allow you to temporarily approve this connection. But then if you restart the browser, close, open it back up and try it again, you're going to get that warning again because it's for security purposes, they'd rather not persist that information. So in the example of Workbench, the client connecting to a station, the Fox service, you reserve the certificate, you click accept because you know I haven't established my chain of trust, but I'm okay with that. But I just need to connect so I can get to work. What you have to remember is that entry gets created in the allowed host tab. And this is where I wanted to tie in the concept of the Workbench user home and the daemon user home. Workbench, the client, has its own stores and files that all this information is stored and collected. And then this user interface is just giving you a UI to those files. So in the example, after hitting accept and this new entry appears in the allowed host tab, I'm not going to see that on the allowed host tab of that's sitting on the daemon user home. I'm going to see that only on the Workbench user home. And to show you, behind the scenes, what I'm referring to is under the directory C:users, your Windows username, Niagara 413, because that happens to be what I've launched, brand name, and security folder. These are the files that all this information gets stored, and that the UI behind here is what's actually delivering that information to you in a easier to use and digest interface. So only when you go in Workbench to tools, and in the current versions that you have out there now, there's the certificate management option. You'll see in 4.13 that the old one is referred to as AX certificate management because that is built via the Java applet. And then the new one is just labeled certificate management, and that'll serve up the web view right there in Workbench. But you'll also have access to these views in the browser. However, there is you can't use a browser to access the Workbench user home. And so so one more time, and this is a concept that's not just a certificate thing. This is also similar to when you have the station running on a daemon and you go to make a copy for you and your laptop. You have a Niagara user home or Workbench user home, and so in that directory you also have a stations folder, and that's where the station gets copied. If a different Windows user logs in, they're going to have their own dedicated space on that laptop. In a similar file directory, but because it's a different Windows user, you will see users, other Windows user, Niagara 413 Tridium security. And the whole intent, and this is a Niagara 4 concept that's been here since the start. Your Workbench user home is sort of your toolbox or sandbox, and the daemon user home is the dedicated space that you're actually going to install and run the application. So you'll likely always see on a site, the daemon user home is what's being leveraged by the actual supervisor installation, and your Workbench user home is just simply where you can copy things and take them with you. And then just to highlight it once more, this is the daemon user home, or accessing the daemon user home. Here this is a screenshot of Workbench. I've connected to a station, and I went to platform services, and I went to the certificate management service. And I actually decided to go to the web view. I also could have gone to the AX cert manager view if I wanted to, since I'm in Workbench, but I'm trying to show off the new view. If I go to certificate manager service and choose the new view, I am served up a web view, and you can see there is no entry here in the allowed host tab because this is the station, not Workbench. The only acceptance I allowed was for the Workbench client, had nothing to do with the station connection as a client connecting to anything. So hence you see no entry here. And to show similar to the Workbench user home file location, this is where all your daemon user home information gets stored. It's C:program data, Niagara 413, brand name, and then from that directory you see a lot more, but I've actually drilled down to the security folder since that's the topic we're talking about today. And so that's a huge, I think, pitfall for a lot of people when they are trying to work with certificates, even today with the existing tools. They're looking at, the one view where they created the certificate, and then they actually go and access maybe the Workbench tools certificate, and they're like, I just made the certificate, where did it go? It's because you're actually creating it in different locations. So you just have to keep that in mind with when you're working. I generally just try to think of it as, if I'm making something, if I need my sandbox or, my toolkit, I'm going to stay in my Workbench user home. So I'm going to go to Tools and Cert Manager. When I'm actually implementing and installing something, I'm headed over to the stations, wherever the station's running. In this case, the station's running on the daemon, so I need to get to the daemon user home. All right, so that's just a good point of clarification, and also kind of explaining the allowed host concept. I know I've seen a couple of times now where folks go through the effort to establish trust, and then they do it correctly, and that's great. And then they're asking or wondering, well, why isn't there an allowed host entry anymore? And it's like, well, you don't need it anymore. You've established trust, and that was the goal. Allowed host is just simply the temporary workaround to allow you to make that connection in the first place. All right, so we talked last week about the concept of a key pair, and that certificates are just generating a key pair. There is a public key and a private key. Again, I encourage anyone who didn't watch last week, go back and review. But what we really emphasized in the example of Alice trying to talk to Bob, the importance of protecting your private key, because you'll use a public key to encrypt, and then Bob, he'll take the message and decrypt it with his private key, and now he can read it. If he hands out his private key, others can then see what gets encrypted by the public key that's out there in the wild. So we really should be considering how to further protect private keys, especially because now more than ever, there are more personas logging into a Niagara station that may have access to the cert manager view, whether it be different vendors working on a site, or maybe it's the IT department that says, we want to handle the certificates, don't worry about it. And now, because of providing a browser experience, you can just simply give them a login. They don't have to have Workbench. They don't have to know what Niagara is. You just give them a login, they log in with their account, and they can, get to work. However, previously, without password protecting the private keys, it wasn't really a good way to take ownership of a key, of a certificate that you create. You could create it, you could put your name on it, but there wasn't anything preventing someone from starting to use it or delete it or modify it in some way. And by providing a password, we're able to we're going to be able to provide that, which is important going forward as more and more components within our industry and the framework are going to start leveraging certificates and public key infrastructure. So just to give a sneak peek here in 4.13, what that looks like, an example of what that's going to look like. Here, I've navigated to the Fox service. Left-hand side is Workbench. Right-hand side, I did it in the browser. And you could see the typical Fox cert property where you can choose which certificate you would like the Fox service to serve up. And now with it, there is a password that you can set. And in this case, because you're trying to set the certificate on the Fox service, you're going to be asked, what is the password protecting this private key? And then in addition, because we also realize this stuff needs to be a little more universal, maybe you don't want ownership of that certificate, you really just want the installation to have ownership. There is a global certificate password that can be used. So if you go in and make a certificate and set it up, and then you don't want to be the person that everyone has to call every time they need to do something with certificates, feel free to leverage the use global certificate password. That remains with the station. That is uniquely generated by the instance or the install. That can't be found or shared. It can just only be leveraged within the station. And I'll touch on this a little more in the demo. I just kind of wanted to give a preview to it so that it wasn't all new when we were walking through it in the demo. And then as a little bonus, because this has always bothered me forever, if for those that have done this already, you will select a certificate for the Fox service to start using, and you don't realize it yet, but maybe there was something not quite right with that certificate, even though it was accepted in the key store. And so now you've selected to use it for the Fox service, and because something wasn't quite right, Niagara recognized this isn't a valid certificate, and it did a fallback to the previously selected certificate. We didn't really, to date, we don't really have a good feedback loop on what you're doing, what's gone wrong, what worked. So now we actually have a certificate status. So if I choose a certificate and something's not quite right, you'll see it go in default and let you know, hey, I've actually left it at the existing certificate. You tried to use this one and that didn't work. So and you also, and I'll show this in the demo, you also get the application director will give you some information as well. And it's just it's one of those things that we hear all the time, people working on certificates, they set it, this is particularly for the web service, they set it and they pull up their browser and they're like, it's still not trusted, what happened? And they go look at the certificate that was served and they said, I just changed it. And what do you mean it's still serving up the old one? And lo and behold, they didn't realize something was wrong to begin with, and the certificate had to fall back. So this is just a nice visual to give you that feedback loop, save you some time from and frustration when you're trying to work with this stuff. All right, now we'll do a preview here of the new web view. In this case, I've opened a browser, I've logged into a station. You can see it's not trusted. At this point, this is just the default certificate, and I clicked accept. So the browser is now, I've consented to the browser that I know this is not a trusted connection, or there's not a established trust, but I just need to connect and show off this view, or maybe get in here and work on this. And this is the first glance, and obviously I'll try to use this throughout the demo. This is the first glance at the new view. It should look fairly similar. It's just the fact that now I'm in the browser. And again, what's very useful here is maybe you or your company has decided, we'd rather not have to deal with the certificate management. The site we're installing has a pretty large networking team, and they're happy to do the work for us. Well, prior, you needed to somehow either get them on your laptop or get them a copy of Workbench. And now they just simply open a browser. You give them a login access. They can log in, and away they go. And we're going to walk through a couple more of these views as a preview, and then we'll dive into the demo, which should be a little more fun. This I'm very excited and proud of. This is when you go to generate a new certificate. This is the new user interface you get in the browser. Again, it looks familiar, but what's been changed here is what I hope is a clear understanding of what makes up a certificate and why, when you click server, client, CA, code signing, or custom, you will now see these extensions getting changed in order to make a certificate valid for its given usage. And I hope this, while being a tool people can leverage and use, I hope it also is helpful from an educational standpoint. You start to better understand why things are the way they are. In addition, you could see today in 4.12 and earlier, there are some extensions that get populated on a certificate when you create it that happen behind the scenes. So in the older field, you would hit new, fill out the info, hit OK. There are extensions you don't even realize are being added to that certificate in order to make it valid for its given usage. This gives you a better oversight as to what's happening. Again, you don't have to be an expert and know what all these things are. Just by clicking the radio buttons, it's populating it for you, but it at least gives you both a visual, so you understand what's happening, and B, it also gives you more flexibility to customize. Maybe you choose one of these radio buttons and you need to further add extensions or further add values to that extension. I don't think the 80% of the customer base will have to do that, but for maybe the IT department that gets in here, they may really like that functionality because they have a need for existing or additional extensions and values for those extensions. And arguably, this is a very easy to use user interface for certificate creation. I don't know if anyone on the TridiumTalk today has ever tried to use OpenSSL. Just getting it built and running on a Windows environment is painful. It's a lot easier on Linux, but then once you have it, it's just a command line interface that, yes, tried and true, but it's so much easier to have a user interface to populate this information. So I wouldn't be surprised to hear maybe down the road some folks even using the tool outside of Niagara just because it's easy and flexible. So very excited for this new view. And again, the demo, we'll be walking through this a little bit. But some things I wanted to point out. We have, you'll notice these little question mark icons, and you'll be able to see this when demoing, and I can click on it. If I were to click on that, these little dialogues pop up and give you some information about what this particular field is. And gives you some examples of what you're supposed to be populating this with. I think for the most part, you're gonna kind of need to know some of the information to begin with, but if you're not doing this every day and you successfully use it once and get it set up, I think these little tool tips are gonna be very helpful for helping you remember later or down the road. When you come back and have to do this again, you say, I remember doing this and there's a trick to it. Maybe clicking on the tooltip will connect the two dots for you and make it easier for you. So excited for that as also another kind of educational piece to this user interface. And then Finally, you may have noticed there is a new key algorithm. And so this represents a not just a UI change, but this is a huge backend change. We have a we have two separate development teams worked on this. So it was while it was a struggle, it was kind of fun to be simultaneously working on the changes in the back end while creating a new browser front end. I say fun, I'm sure the developers loved it. The elliptic curve key algorithm is becoming popular, and we sort of foresee looking ahead that there may be a need or necessary requirement in some installations where an IT department may request that that's what's being used. Would I go around and tell people this is the only key algorithm you need to start using going forward? No. This is just simply another tool in the toolbox in case you need it, and it's got its benefits, but there are, in this particular case, there isn't a right or wrong. It's just about what you need to get the job done. All right, so let me switch over a little bit to a browser and bring up Workbench. We're going to do a little demo. So again, here I am in 4.13. I have a station running. And if I could, I'm going to bring up the application director as well. Got a station called TridiumTalk. We've all come to know and are familiar with. You notice that when I just first connected to that station, I wasn't prompted with a certificate that I needed to approve, and that's because I had been playing with this earlier today, making sure things worked for me, and I had already made this exception right here in my Workbench User Homes Allowed Host tab. So when I clicked accept that first time, that was earlier today at 9:21 Eastern, it made this entry and remembers it, unlike a browser. Turn off the browser, open it back up. You're going to have to click, click the link to continue each time. In this case, it'll remember that exception. And if I wanted to, I could delete. And then if I disconnect, I am prompted with that default certificate. And I have to again accept, and the entry gets created. And there's my credentials to log into the station. And if I come back, you can see the entry is back at 11:33. So again, the allowed host tab is just sort of that. I don't want people to, as they have been for years, they're sort of always leveraging the allowed host tab, like really trying to steer people to start creating the chain of trust and properly leveraging public key infrastructure to get us out of the dark ages of the allowed host tab. All right, so now I'm in my station, and the first thing I'm going to do is point out when I was in the Fox service, this was the reason that certificate that was served up was the default certificate. That's because that's what's been selected. But let's hop back into, let's hop over to the browser, and I'm going to log in. Since we really want to be showing off the web views, I'm going to log into the browser, navigate down to the new certificate management view. And here's that default certificate I was just talking about before. Obviously, the original, and I think this, I probably had this station. Actually, the key store probably came over when I upgraded from 4.12 to 4.13 for the first time. So here's my original from 4.12 and earlier. But when I installed 4.13 for the first time, we have a new certificate. Again, the subject name is still Niagara 4. It's just that its alias is now default, which I think kind of makes a little more logical sense. I used to get calls all the time where people would say, that Tridium certificate's expiring. And I try to explain to them that it's just a default certificate that's generated on the fly. If I hit reset, I will actually wipe every certificate in my key store and it'll just regenerate a new default certificate. You will also see there is a little badge here indicating that this certificate needs to be there permanently or at least always exist, and that's just so that you can recover. We don't want people accidentally, which has happened, we don't want people accidentally deleting the certificate and not being able to make an encrypted connection to their station, and then worse, they have non-encrypted connections disabled, so now you're just locked out. All right, so we also, obviously, we have to have the system trust store. We talked about this last week a little bit. This is where your certificate authorities reside. However, this is the one that you can't customize. You can't add to this. This is the one delivered by our JRE vendor, and all these authorities pay for the right to be here. And so we explained last week that you can obviously pay for this service. There's a convenience in that you don't need to add the authority to the trust store, but you don't have to use them. You simply could add to the trust store yourself. And in Niagara, we like to separate these two by showing off the user trust store, implying system implying, pre-populated and locked out, user implying something you can add to. So in this case, I think, I already have some CAs just sitting in here. If you created a certificate, which we're going to walk through in the demo, created the request and sent that off to someone to sign, you're going to need to make sure that whatever they use to sign it is either in your system trust store or your user trust store. So if it's just a if it's a customer, like a networking team, they'll likely just leverage their own certificate authorities, and they'll send you back a public certificate in order to install that here into the user trust store and establish trust with anything they've signed. And then, of course, as I already covered, the allowed host tab. Again, nothing here because I am using the browser connecting to the station, which is running on the daemon. This is a separate location than what we saw in the workbench user homes certificate management. And the title here at the top hopefully can help people with, you're jumping back and forth and you're trying to remember which one you're connected to. You'll see when you go to tools in Workbench, you'll see that say certificate management for Niagara Workbench. Here, I'm actually referring to the different stores available on the whatever remote host I'm connected to. All right, so let's jump in and make a certificate. So I click new. I want to call the alias, let's just call it TridiumTalk. And this all should be somewhat familiar. A common name, we talked about this last week, the importance of that matching whatever your URL or client connection name is going to be. So in this case, my station is just running locally. I've been accessing it by connecting to quote unquote local host. So that's the name I need to see served up on the certificate. So I'm going to go ahead and just write local host. Then I can come up with organizational unit, and I'm just product management. Organization is Tridium. My locality is Richmond, Virginia, and United States. All right, one piece of the puzzle done. You may have noticed that when I entered localhost and saved that, the subject alternative name populated a field. And previously in 4.12 in the existing tool, if you had left the subject alternative name blank, we actually, when you'd click OK to start generating it, we would actually go ahead and copy whatever common name you used to a DNS name entry, because a lot of times, and I don't know if this is all browsers, but often browsers and other tools are looking for both, or kind of requiring that a subject alternative name is not blank. So we just kind of went ahead and did that without people even realizing it. This tool is helping, like as I mentioned, helping people understand everything that's happening in order to generate this. Now, subject alternative name, by default, we just copy what was written as the common name, but this is your opportunity to list additional names that you may use when you go to access this server. In this case, localhost will work. I also could look up my IP address if I wanted to, that my laptop's currently sitting on. And if I open the browser and typed in the IP address, I would get served from the web server, the exact same experience, just that the URL now has the IP rather than a domain name. And as you can see, there's a variety of potential subject alternative names. Some of these are probably out of the scope for our community, but these are also commonly used for other spaces in the industry. And we just give the ability to add as many as you want and of the different types. So if, for example, if I did look up my IP address, I could just add IP address, put in the IP, and now both names exist on the certificate. And so no matter how I'm accessing it in the browser, I can be assured the correct name or IP address or whatever is being provided. So in this case, I'm not going to really change much else. I've got not before, not after. That by default sets it to a year. Feel free to set it to whatever you're comfortable with. Key algorithm, I'm going to stick with RSA. The key size, I'm going to leave it at the default 2048. The larger the key size, the longer it takes to try to hack it. I think these numbers are going to start to, we're going to have to start deprecating the smaller ones as time continues, because as hardware advances, people can chip away at these algorithms and shorten the time it takes to guess. So eventually you'll start to see the industry say you can no longer use 1024, you need to start using 2048 or 3072. And then who knows, when we get into quantum computing, maybe all this just breaks anyway, but that's for a separate discussion. I'm using this for a server certificate, so we'll leave the certificate usage as server. And because we pre-populate everything, I don't have to worry about any of this other information. The key usage is already populated for me so that the certificate will function as a server certificate. The subject alternative name we've already talked about, and the extended key usage is already populated. If I needed to add to these fields or these extensions, I absolutely could. And then in addition, if I needed to add additional extensions, basic constraints, or certificate revocation list distribution points, I can do that as well. These are all tools leveraged by, I would say, the cybersecurity industry and public key infrastructure. For our uses and purposes, what we have here as the default is all you're going to need to properly leverage this in Niagara, but the options are there. It's in your toolbox in case this is required, maybe by your customer, or if you have a reason to consider that for yourself as a company. All right, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK. Oh, private key passwords. As I mentioned before, we need to protect this private key. So I'm going to be creating this certificate, and I want to have ownership of it. I don't want others to be able to use this. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a custom password. And now that I've given it a custom password, the other option was to do the global certificate password, which is kind of stays with the Niagara instance. And that both will work just fine. I can really appreciate why someone would prefer to stick with the global certificate password. You're just sort of allowing the station to sort of authenticate on its behalf, rather than having a user constantly on standby to provide that certificate. So you're given the flexibility here. Obviously, the most secure thing is to protect it with a password and take ownership of it. But we can understand the reality of we're doing our best to be as secure by default as we can, but we still need the stuff to be functional and usable by the customers. All right, so finish that. Off we go. Generates a certificate, and there's my new certificate. Excellent. Click view. Yep, that's everything I just populated. Great. So now what? Well, I see that it's yellow. Okay, so this is yellow because it's a self-signed certificate. The subject or common name is localhost, which represents, once I set this to say the web service, it represents where, what server you have reached, and it is issued by, it's itself, that vouching for itself, that it promises you that this is in fact localhost, or you've reached localhost. And I've explained that a little more in depth on last week's talk. So if that confuses you, please go back and watch last week's episode. We're going to march on and show off the rest of this to just show how we can establish trust here. So we have a self-signed cert. I would like to sign this in order to be a properly trusted and established certificate. So I have to generate a certificate request. So I've selected in the list here which one I want to create. This is a certificate signing request. In this case, it's just a prompt showing you, confirming this is what you want to create the CSR for. I can edit the file name if I want. I'll leave it all as it is. Click OK. And here's a, please enter password for decrypting the private key contained in the import file. So already I'm being prompted to, because I want to make sure that the person who created it and has ownership of this certificate is okay with this behavior. So I'll go ahead and put, I hope I don't fat finger things. Go ahead and put the password I use to protect the private key. And just like that, a CSR file is generated and now downloaded to my downloads folder through the browser. So now I have this CSR file, and I can send that off to whomever's going to do the signing. Maybe that's the network team on the customer site. Maybe that's myself, because I want to be the authority. Maybe this is some certificate that's going to be out there on the internet, so I'd rather be signed by one of these paid for services. So I send it off to DigiCert at whatever cost they charge these days, and they'll sign that. For our purposes, we're going to focus on being our own authority, or in the case of maybe a site having a network team that likes to manage this themselves, you're just going to pass it off, that CSR file off to that team. So now I need tools to sign the certificate. Again, I mentioned the difficulties with OpenSSL. That simply has a command line interface. One could absolutely use that. I much rather prefer a user interface that's easier for me to use. In our case, we've had all along and still do, we have a certificate signer tool. So I open my certificate signing tool. If I scroll to where that CSR file was generated and saved, which in fact was my downloads folder because I was in my browser, I can see the TridiumTalk CSR file I just created. Okay, well, that's the one we want to sign. Oh, great. Shows me the info. I can extend the date if I wanted to, because now I'm going to, I will be the issuer of the certificate. So maybe I want it valid for even longer. Here, I'm going to choose which certificate authority I would like to use in order to sign this. Now, this is a step I did not actually show. I have previously created, as you can see, several certificate authorities. In this case, there's a product management certificate authority. And this drop down is actually looking at my Workbench user homes key store. So this is a collection of certificate authorities that are in the Workbench user home. And I can show that as soon as I'm done signing it. I will use the PMCA, and I just happen to remember my password that's used to sign certificates with this CA. And I will click OK. Now it's asking, well, where do you want me to put this signed certificate? We're just going to put it in the default location. Excellent. Real quick, just so you know I wasn't lying. This is, again, the Niagara Workbench key store. And as you can see, maybe I'll sort. As you can see, I have a PMCA. This is the certificate authority that I just used to sign it. And again, you see the yellow sign because this, in fact, is a root certificate. It's a CA whose issuer is itself. And again, if that's confusing, watch last week. We talked about that. All right, so now let's go back over to the browser. All right, I've created a service certificate. I generated a cert signing request. I've now used some tool to sign it, whether it be handed it off to someone or served it up to my own tool and decided to sign it. Now it's time to import that certificate so that we can mend the two together in order to have a properly signed certificate. So there's my TridiumTalk PEM. Click OK. One last check, make sure everything's right. So now you'll see the subject name will be localhost and issued by Product Management CA. Okay. Ooh, password again. Key store already contains an entry under the alias TridiumTalk. Of course, that's what I generated to begin with. This entry will be overwritten. Please enter the password to decrypt this existing entry or click cancel if you do not wish to override it. Okay, so this was the password protecting the private key. Now that I've given consent that we can override that existing certificate and private key, it would like me to create a new password, or I can keep using the same one if I want to, but it's now asking me, okay, now that we're all good to go, please tell me what password you want to start using again to protect the private key. Again, really hope I don't fat finger anything. And it worked. You just saw now the certificate go from, or the shield icon go from yellow to green. And if we go take a look at it, aha, subject name is localhost, and it is issued by Product Management CA. This is now a signed certificate, not self-signed, and it's sitting in the key store of the remote host I'm connected to. Great. What's next? Well, now that I've created this thing, I want to set this, and I decided I'd like to do this from Workbench because I want to have the application director open in another tab. I would like to wrap up the demo. I'd like to show the web service start using this certificate. So here I am on the web service property sheet, and I have the main HTTPS cert. I'm going to go ahead and expand the server certificate health, the status, to give me that feedback. Okay, I would like to start using the TridiumTalk certificate. I have to enter the password. So now my station is not allowed to access the certificate unless the owner of the certificate consents to it. And again, if I had been using the global certificate password, all you would have to do is simply check that. No password needs to be shared or remembered. It's just, it stays with the system. But in this case, I wanted to be protective of my certificate, so I used a personal password. So if I hit save, You can see it attempted to switch out the certificate, and then it restarts the web service because it's going to start up serving this new certificate. Because everything was in good standing, the certificate status is okay, and you could see that it returned that certificate I just created and signed. Had something been wrong, like I had put the wrong password in, it would have failed to swap over, but it would have at least told me what has happened, and that I'm still using that previous certificate, not the new one, because something went wrong. All right, now my web service in my station is serving up the TridiumTalk certificate. Let's go back to this browser. And in fact, we'll hit, to be honest, I'm not sure if I need to restart the browser, but let's see. Let me first actually show, if I go into settings, and last week I had Edge, this week I'm using Chrome. If I go look for certificates, manage device certificates, just like last week, it's the same pop-up because this is coming from the OS. And so what I'm looking for is, I want to make sure that this that certificate I just used to sign is in fact in my Windows Trust Store, so that my browser knows it can start trusting it. Let's see, I forget what I called it. I think it was product management CA. Excellent. Okay, so now that I know it's in there, let's go ahead and restart the browser. Open Chrome. Bear with me as I'm working with multiple monitors. Okay, HTTPS localhost. Look at that. Nice, happy lock. Connection is secure. Certificate is valid. And just like last week's, we walked through how you can review this. That was Edge, this is Chrome. You can see it's slightly different, but it still tells the same story. It is my common name, certificate localhost, that's been signed by the product management CA. And as I just showed just a second ago, that product management CA is sitting in the trust store that's leveraged by the browser. And so nice, happy, trusted connection. I log in and off we go. Again, just the web service at this point, but we are a little short on time. So that hopefully is enough to get people comfortable again using certificates. And one last piece that I actually want to hit on a slide. This was just from last week's Tridium talk. It's the client and servers in Niagara. We talked about the different client-server relationships all throughout Niagara. Workbench as a client, the browser as a client, and which of its servers it hits. I had one more. I hesitated on wanting to add it last week because I was just trying to focus on sort of the UI clients. But in the case of a Niagara network connection, a station-to-station connection, that is a similar client-server relationship, although this time it's an application, a Fox client connection within the station, and it's trying to connect to another station. And easiest example to think about is a supervisor connecting to a Jace. So the supervisor creates a Fox client connection, connects to the Jace station's Fox service, and that Fox service would be serving up a certificate. And if it was signed by an authority that's in the trust store of the supervisor's station, the connection will happen automatically, and you will not have a need to use the allowed host tab anymore. We want to emphasize just clicking accept is really an exception to the rule. It's there to make it easier to get started, but properly setting up your certificates and leveraging public key infrastructure is actually signing and establishing that chain of trust, so that all your connections automatically connect and you don't have to worry about it. All right, so that was a lot to cover, and we're definitely over time. But one last reminder, as I showed last week, there is a Niagara 4 hardening guide, and we've published this for years. We update it continuously, particularly with each release, and when there's new features involved, we've added some of this content in there. You can simply go to Tridium.com, services and support, and go to the library, and there just do a search for hardening. You'll find the guide. You should always reference this when you're trying to harden your customer sites, or if you have an IT department that would like to know more information about Niagara as an application, being that it's going to sit on their network. You pass them this hardening guide, and it really shows off all the things that are available for people to turn on and leverage in the name of security. And now, hopefully, between these two Tridium talks, the community feels a little more comfortable, armed with this newfound knowledge, helping establish these encrypted connections and establishing the chain of trust. And we will run through these last few slides quickly. We have the roadmap. Always my favorite slide on the website, shows the years and years of development building on top of one another. Tridium University, a great place to sign up for the course or take a couple of the free e-learning modules that are there. Find more Tridium talks. So once this finishes and the recording's done, we will upload to the website. You'll go to services and support, go to events, and of course, we have a YouTube channel. You can see James Johnson, Kevin Mamjek, as well as some of the other Tridium talks get posted there as well. We're well past time at 12:01, so I'm just going to go ahead and we're going to yield Q&A to answering the questions offline, but I promise I will address each and every one of them, even the ones that have been answered while we've been going. All of that will get posted when we post the content. And I really appreciate everyone's time today. Hope between this video and the last, people are feeling eager to get into certificates and not be as nervous or frustrated trying to understand these things. And hopefully these two videos can just be good references down the road, because if you're like me, you learn something new, you may not touch it for a couple of weeks, and then by then you've forgotten everything. So hopefully this video just makes it easy to come back and maybe trigger some of that memory and make it a lot easier to use. But thank you all very much, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, and I look forward to seeing people in London.